Explain audiophile terms. This question comes from Vasil, or this request, I should say, comes from Vasil in Chicago. Would you be able to explain some of the terminology that reviewers and people in the high-end audio industry use to describe sound? Adjectives like transparent, bright, warm, detailed, dynamic, analytic, etc. Thank you, Vasil. Well, this is a great question because we almost never help people out by explaining these terms. And it, being in this for so long, I kind of take it for granted. So, what about terms like, well, let's take a few of them. Transparent. What does it mean if sound is transparent? Well, the quick answer to that is we can see through it, right? How best to describe that? The best way I can imagine to describe that term, a transparent sound, is to compare it to a less than transparent sound, an opaque sound. So what would that be? Well, if I'm listening here on these pair of speakers, and the image that's being presented is rather muddled, where the position of the instruments, the singers in the band are all kind of scrunched together, kind of muddled, and whether you've heard that or not, you hear it in car audio a lot. Everything's just kind of a mush, and if you do something to the system, to the electronics, that adds transparency, what we're doing is kind of cleaning away the muddle. So picture 4 musicians. We've got a guitar, drums, bass, and a singer. And they're all playing together. Well, in one version that is opaque or less transparent, we would find them, I want to say, physically closer together so that we can't kind of see through them, but that's of course a poor choice of words because that's not really what's happening. But their sounds are colliding together, they're intermingling more than they would if you had the advantage of sitting here listening to them live. So transparent sound is where we do something to where that intermingling of their sounds lessens, and we can now hear between the musicians. We can hear through the musicians and get a better sense of the sound stage. So I don't know how good of an explanation that is, but that's kind of what we mean. Bright, well, bright, you see that a lot in wines. So if it's a bright wine, it's, I don't want to say sour, but it's a sharp taste. So when we hear the word bright, we have an extension on the treble. Maybe the treble is overbearing the high frequencies. If you have a guitar that's playing the very top notes of the guitar, and I don't mean the upper notes, but the upper harmonics of the guitar. So if we strum it and there's an exaggeration to the top frequencies, because we remember that all sounds are made up of multiple frequencies called harmonics. So if we were to exaggerate that top end, if we were to make it louder than out of proportion to the other sounds, then we would call that bright. Or sometimes bright can be mistaken because it's this high frequency exaggeration. It's because we have a lack of bass. So the balance is skewed bright. The balance is much more active in the treble region than in the bass region because there's too much treble or there's too little bass. So that's what bright would be. Warm is generally, God, that's a hard one, isn't it? Somebody described it as double cream. I thought that was pretty good. A warm sound is something without grating additives to it. Warm is usually, can be associated with rolled off a little bit, so less of the bright sound we just talked about, less of the exaggerated highs, sometimes a little bit of oomph in the mid bass, this area in my voice. So if that's sort of a warmth region, so kind of upper rounded off mid bass, lower down on the treble to where we've kind of smoothed off the sharp edges, and it's just sounding, I don't want to say richer, it's sounding less bright. See, this is part of the problem. We use terms that we don't understand to describe other terms that we don't understand. So, but I'll do my best. But that's that sort of nice mid-bass bump with lower, higher frequencies. Detailed is sort of the opposite of the mushy sound. So if I have, again, a guitar, if I'm plucking a guitar, I might hear those strings sound kind of like nylon strings, but a very detailed sound would have a quicker transient response, faster attack, maybe a little bit more substance to the top end, so it sounds more like a steel string as opposed to a nylon string. That would be more detailed. There's other places of detail, of course. If I hit a cymbal with a brush, if I say, wow, that's really detailed, I can hear the individual brush strokes. I can hear the individual, whatever the parts of the brush, the whiskers in the brush are, I can hear more of that as opposed to just a psh. I can hear this detailed presentation of the parts that make up the sound, if you will. Dynamic, well, that's fairly obvious, I would think. Dynamic is dynamic. It's lots of highs and lots of lows in terms of volume. And the last one he asked about is analytic. So analytical, sterile is somewhat the opposite of warm. So we have a lean sound. Lean would be the opposite of warm. So now take your mid bass, this part of the this part of the chest or the body of a cello, and reduce its level down. And this is all, I don't want to say the word psychologically, but it's all perceived, because the levels really aren't changing. It's our perception of them that changes. So reduce down that warm area, increase up a little bit in the top end, and make it just kind of without life, without the warmth that we just described. So this is a subject we should talk more about, and we will over time. But for right now, that's a good start. Okay, thanks. And great question. I hope we do it again. All right, bye-bye.